Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam, and today I'm going to be talking about things to look for when you're purchasing plants. The number one thing I look for when I'm purchasing plants is if it's during the growing season, which for me in my area is about mid-April till about the 1st of September, I want to see new growth. This Hellerai holly right here is just absolutely covered in new growth. If it's growing like that, I can almost be assured that it's happy. The newest growth on these shrubs is a lighter green color than the older growth. Don't mistake that for a problem. That's just completely normal. But if you do see yellowing on this new growth in which you see the veins in the middle of the leaves, that typically means that plant has been overwatered, and I will avoid purchasing plants that I can actually see the veins on the leaves on the new growth. If you're looking at needled plants or conifers like this DeGroote's arborvitae, look all the way down to the base and make sure there's no browning at the base of it. If it's browning on the interior of the plant, that's not actually a problem. Usually that just means it was underwatered at some point. It'll shed a little bit of that interior foliage occasionally. That's no big deal. But if it's browning on the outside in the lower part of the plant, usually that is some sort of issue, and you probably want to avoid that. So I usually, on conifers, I look more at the base of them than I do at the top. This is an Indian hawthorn right here, and at some point in the past, it had chewed leaves on it right here that you can see right there. Now, a lot of people will see that and then not purchase this plant and thinking that there's some issue on it. What I do for insect-related issues is I look at the new growth. This is about the last 4 or 5 months of this plant's life in the nursery right here, and there's absolutely no chewing whatsoever has taken place on this plant on the new growth. So whatever this was, these leaves have been on here for over a year. Whatever this was took place last year. It's just not that big of a deal. So chewing on the new growth, I probably would avoid it. A few chewed leaves on the old growth, don't worry about it. It's just really not that big of a deal. Here's an example of a plant issue where the fertilizer has run out on the plant. This is a Carolina jasmine right here. It's a native vine to the mid-Atlantic states. Gets beautiful yellow flowers on it a couple times a year actually. This thing is really dark, rich green color, absolutely perfect. Here's one that was grown right along beside it, but it's yellowing from the top all the way down to the bottom. And yellowing throughout the plant screams lack of fertilizer to me. Yellowing on the new growth usually screams that the plant's been overwatered. Yellowing on the oldest growth usually tells me that it's been underwatered and it's just going to shed a few leaves, and that's not that big of a deal. But if I see yellowing from the top to the bottom, that is usually a fertilizer related issue. Believe it or not, I'd still buy this plant. This is not a plant that would scare me off, but I would not put a stressed plant in during stressful times, meaning I wouldn't put it in July. I would put it in whatever my peak planting time is. If you can actually put some fertilizer in this container, green it right back up, and that's what I've done with this plant. I think it had spilled at some point and lost the fertilizer in it, and so we've just come back in here and put some of these prills back in it. That's what you're going to see in the containers that you're buying, or some sort of colored prill. That's the fertilizer in them. And the nurseries tend to put fertilizer in them that runs out not that long after they've shipped them. So if they expect to have this plant for 10 months at the nursery, they might put a 10 to 12 month fertilizer on it. So sometime when it's at the garden center, if it sits there for a while, it can start to off color a little bit. But like I say, that one just doesn't bother me that much. Here's an example of the interior yellowing I was talking about. This is a very healthy spirea, not having any issues, got lots of new growth on it, still flowering. Some of the foliage in the interior of it is coming off, and that's because it got dry, and plants will not sacrifice flowers or fruit. They'll always sacrifice interior foliage. I'd definitely buy this plant, take it straight home, put it in the ground, no problem. Here is an example of some spotting on some leaves. Hydrangeas will almost always have these spots on them. I worry about spotting on the leaves based on what time of year it is. If it was in April or May and this thing had just leafed out and it was already spotted up, I probably wouldn't purchase it. This thing is about a month from going dormant at this point. It's the very end of the season. So this little bit of limited spotting it got during the growing season, just not a big concern to me at all. So I'm just not going to worry about that. I'm going to go home, stick it in the ground. When the leaves fall off of it, when it goes dormant though, I am going to clean them up. just to make sure that whatever this is that's on them, I remove it from the base of the plant. Here is a plant that I'd run away from as fast as possible. This is an August Beauty gardenia, okay? And it's wilting. You can see right here that some of these branches are wilting, okay? Which wilting normally means that it needs water. When you pick this pot up, it weighs 30 pounds. It's just absolutely full of water and it's in a wilt. What that means is the roots that are in this container have started to die and they can no longer supply water to the top of this plant. So this plant is dying from a lack of water, but not because there's no water in the pot, but because the roots are dead. Here's a conifer example, like I was talking about, where it's browning out in the bottom of it. Conifers are so slow to recover. Even if this isn't a long-term issue on this cryptomeria, it's gonna take a year, maybe 2, to fill this thing back in, even if you put it in the perfect place and you're the greatest gardener ever. That's just the way that's gonna be. It's just gonna take such a long time, as opposed to that spirea over there, which is thinning a few leaves out of the middle. In the winter time, I can shear this plant back a little and all this interior space will fill in a single season. So leafy plants are far more forgiving than conifers in that regard. One other thing that gets frequently talked about is root-bound plants, where the roots have wrapped around and around and around themselves inside that container, and you pull it out and they're just girdled around it. That has just never bothered me as much as it bothers other people, because I can fix it. When I pull this thing out of the container, I can cut those roots, going around, several times around that container. It just doesn't bother me as much as it bothers other people. If you think you're not gonna be able to maintain the plants very well, meaning that you're not a person who's gonna do a lot of watering, you may want to avoid root-bound plants, because they're gonna initially need a little bit more water because there won't be as much soil in the pot. The root-bound issue that actually makes me nervous is these plants were grown in smaller pots and then planted into larger pots. And frequently you can see right here where it was in a 1-gallon container, and then it got actually booted up to this 7-gallon container. Maybe it was in a 3-gallon container for a little while right about here. I always look inside near the base of this plant. If I see roots from where it was in that pot going in a circle like this around there, I definitely would avoid that plant. I can't fix a root-bound issue in the center of the container like that, but I can fix them as part of this container issue. So do look for that there are not any roots near the base of this thing that are circling on the top of the pot like this, because that's from where it was in an old container. Hopefully, when the nursery transplanted this, they did a good job of breaking up that root ball. So just a quick review. If it's the growing season in your area, I like to buy plants that have new growth on them. That's usually a great sign that they're in good health. I'd like to have consistent green color from the bottom of the plant to the top of the plant. If there's some yellow leaves in the bottom of it, I typically don't worry about that. Somebody missed a watering at some point, or the plant was in full flower and it was just using so much that the roots couldn't even supply it. Not a big deal. Yellowing on the new growth, I'm definitely concerned about. Not the natural yellowing that plants have on new growth, but if you see any veins in the leaves on the new growth, I do not buy those plants. If I see yellowing throughout the entire plant from the top to the bottom, that's worth buying off a sale shelf for sure. Put a little fertilizer in it, green it back up, put it in the ground. Shouldn't be a problem. Insect related issues, if it's in the old growth, not worried about it. If it's on the newest growth, stay away from that plant. In all likelihood, it's got something currently on it that you'll want to avoid. I like to buy conifers that are in peak health. That's needled plants. They take too long to recover from issues, and so buying them with issues is probably not a great idea. And if you see a plant in a wilt, or a plant that has several dead limbs on it that have happened recently, if you pick that plant up and it's heavy, run from that plant, because it definitely has root rot. Spotting on leaves, if it's late season, I typically don't worry about spots on leaves. Those leaves have been on that plant the entire season. Of course, they got exposed to something. The leaves stayed too wet at some point during the summer. Not a big deal. Spotting on leaves right when the plant leaves out in the spring, that's probably not an ideal type of situation. Maybe the leaves weren't cleaned up from the previous season or something, and it's just going to start off early, which is going to make it worse that year. So if this video was helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Also comment below with any questions you have about picking out healthy plants. Thanks again.